morning.
Gotta come over here.
Oh, she wants me to move in. Good morning. For those of you who have not met me, I'm Dr. Brenda Lewis, and I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies. I am really excited about so many of you being in this room to talk about CV writing. This is really exciting. The Graduate Student Organization has been on fire since summer, and they have planned a lot of activities such as this to help you as graduate students. So I'm really glad to see the turnout. How many of you from the College of Sciences? Great. How many from the College of Arts and Letters? All right. Health Sciences? One, okay.
Melody!
Represent. How about the College of Education? Oh, good. And who did I leave off?
Business.
Business and Public Administration.
And engineering.
Great. I want to say, first of all, a real shout out to our facilitator, Dr. Shelley Rodrigo from the College of Arts and Letters, who's going to start this workshop. And then I want to give a thanks to the faculty members who took time from their schedules to work with you in small groups at the second half of this. I just know this is going to be very productive, and I'm looking forward to kind of hearing what's being discussed and moving around among the groups. The GSO is an organization that is really about graduate students, and Danielle Forrest, who is the president, has been an awesome leader. And so give some thought, if you're not a member, to becoming a member and lending your expertise and your concerns to this organization. They really need as much help as they can get. They've been doing great work, and I'm really pleased to work with them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alice, who is from the Career Planning and Placement Office, so she can tell you a little bit about the services that they provide.
Good morning, and I too am excited to see so many people, because then that means that you all won't be coming to my office. You'll have your CVs all prepared. But the Career Management Center is a resource for graduate students as well as undergraduate students and alumni. So even after you leave us, we're still able to work with you and provide service. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of times graduate students particularly don't think about or haven't, even considered, that we are a resource for you. And even though a lot of the events might appear to be geared towards undergraduate students, they're really not. And everybody and anybody is welcome, because you're all looking for jobs after graduation. You're all looking for improving your job search strategies and skills and all those kinds of things. So what I brought, not a PowerPoint, I just have a few minutes, but I just brought a one-page kind of overview of some of the programs, the resources, and basically how the Career Management Center can provide service to you. Each college has in its satellite setup a career services small staff to work with you. So I work with Arts and Letters. There's Penny Pickle, who works with the College of Business and Administration. Beverly Forbes is the liaison for the College of Engineering. Randy Shabro is the liaison for Education and Health Sciences, and Aaron Mills is the liaison for the College of Sciences. So we all have staff in your colleges to work with you as well, and invite you to participate with us by meeting with those people, because we can't provide for you what you need if we don't know what you need. So part of the conversation is also sharing information back and forth, even if it's just you stop in and say, it'd be really great if you did this for graduate students. We might already do that, but it's just not being marketed in a way that you see it. So I invite you to do that. And I just wanted to tell you about one upcoming event where a lot of times people say, oh, graduate students don't have time to do this, but I think that it's a worthwhile event. It's our fall fair. We have right now 81 different employers that hire graduate students and undergraduate students. And so it's a great opportunity to start the networking process and find out what it is that they're looking for and what kind of some of those processes are, even if you're at the beginning stages of your programs. So some of those events are here. I know that some of the colleges do things specifically for their students from our office. So it's a good connection. And I'll leave these, or I'll kind of hand those to pass around. And then In my role as Director of Student and Alumni Programs, I work with other student groups, and I have met with GSO, and we've had a couple of conversations about some things that maybe we can start doing to kind of be able to be a better resource for graduate students. So we're going to be working on those things, but if you're involved with other organizations or you have ideas about programs or services that you feel need to be here on campus for you, let me know that. That's part of my role, and so I have my business cards here too. Feel free to take one. And I will be happy to talk with anybody regardless of major, college, or whatever, if you have ideas or programs that you think might be a benefit to graduate students. So thank you for inviting me, and have a great afternoon, or morning and afternoon.
Thank you. Folks, what I just translated that all as is you just found out that you have another free set of eyes to look at your CV when you have a draft of it ready. And you're always looking for those. You can never have enough people look at a version of your CV, so you just got the offer that the Career Management Center would be willing to do that for you, and that is worth its weight in gold. Don't forget that. My name's Shelly Rodrigo. I'm, as mentioned, I'm from the College of Arts and Letters. Uh-oh, no signal. Come on. And I figured I'd briefly start with why me? That's too dark. Is that too dark? I mean, you still have light to see. I'd rather you be able to see this. I'll make it a little bigger. Now, you're like, Shelly, why is this not printed for us? Because a couple reasons. One, we'll go green. Two, I can continue to add to it and you can find stuff. So the main thing you need to write down right now is bit.ly and case matters, capital GSO, lowercase cb, capital ODU. That will get you to this URL and all of this notes here. So briefly, again, why me up here? You would think I did CV workshops both in my department and my college while I was a grad student 4 or 5 years running. So I guess at that point I should just say I should know this stuff. But no, realistically, a couple things. One, part of my research interest is professional development, especially with graduate students. Two, when I was a graduate student, I was one of the student co-coordinators for the Preparing Future Faculty program at Arizona State University. So I really believe in the importance of stuff like this, and anytime the organization asks, I'm going to say yes, I believe that strongly about it. And also my point of, I went numerous times, just because you come today doesn't mean you don't necessarily come next year when this is offered as well, because you'll be in a different place with your CV. I want to make sure I leave enough time for you to workshop with people in your college, but we could spend all 2 hours covering just what could be in your CV. So I just want you to realize that tension we have going here. First, for how many of you, is this really the first time that you've heard this thing, CV, curriculum vitae? Has anyone not seen one before? Okay, that's good. You have a sense of it. So primarily what I like to think of the CV is it's a list of experiences and achievements. And when I say list, that is part of the distinction between CVs and resumes. Ultimately, your CV should list your entire professional academic. CVs really are an academic resume. If you decide you're going to work outside of higher ed, you'll want to make sure you also have a resume. That is a different. And one of the big differences is length. CVs wants that full, or at least your master CV, and we can talk about that a little later, but your CV that you keep ongoing, it should have everything in it. Starting from grad school days. Or, if you were one of those students who participated in undergraduate research, that might hit that master, like I said, master CV. But in short, it's a list of experiences and achievements. Now, the nice thing is, you're like, yeah, but Shelly, the list, what we list, how we list it, that's what really matters. You're right. And the nice thing about being up here, I kind of love this, is I don't want to say there is no right way, but there is no one way to format and decide what's in your CV and how you're going to present it. And that's both exciting and, as well as a little intimidating, being in your shoes, especially if you haven't even started your CV yet, because you're like, I don't even know what to include. Part of what we'll talk is some of the major categories and the type of stuff that you'll start including in there, and over time might continue to grow depending on what you do professionally. But just remember, here's the most important thing if you walk away from today, is you will always, for the rest of your academic career, if you stay in academia, you will always be looking at other CVs as examples and tweaking your own based on it. And I'll give you a big example with mine where I had to do something and I went and looked at a bunch of CVs and came up with my own method because none of them did exactly what I needed it to do. And so that's part of what I want you to understand, is that the most important thing you can do is just start paying attention to them now. So you do ask your mentors and your teachers. And if you are at a conference and you're really impressed with a scholar, you go online and see if a copy of their CV is online, and you look at this. And it's not only what have they done, the content, but also look at how are they presenting themselves. So before I go into what is in a CV, I want 2 disclaimers for you to remember. Disclaimer number 1. I'm to the College of Arts and Letters. And even worse, I'm the mushy, mushy humanist. All that to say is discipline matters. And so, my default will be biased towards that because that's where I come from. And that's part of why you'll workshop with folks in other disciplines. But I have tried to take some of that into consideration. Second, and this is important, CVs and ODU. And this is just one from the Colleges of Science. I want to scroll to the bottom. Old Dominion has actually a very specific format of how they want their tenure track faculty to present their CVs in their promotion packets. And it's important that you just understand that. So when I say that as you're doing these that you want to go find examples, I'm also very emphatically saying you don't want all of your examples to be ODU examples, because one of the big ones I want to point at, and if we go further up, you'll see list from past to present, list from past to present. In my experience, that is not the norm of CVs. Normal CVs tend to list your most current work and then go backwards. And so I just want to make sure that you understand that thing with when you're looking at ODU CVs, when your professors go, here's mine. That's one major disclaimer to keep in mind. And we'll see a little of that today because I collected a handful of CVs to share with you, or aspects of them to share. So, that was our disclaimers. What's in a CV? A lot of stuff, to put it mildly. CVs are generally broken up into, actually, I'm going to say 4 major categories. Kind of contact information, education, and then research, teaching, and service. So there's that header information of just who are you and how do we get a hold of you, because a lot of times, most of the time when you're using a CV, you're using it either for job application, or increasingly you'll find, folks, if you're submitting something for publication, if you're submitting something for an award, they'll ask for a CV or a shortened version of your CV. And you want that information. Because even if you included your email on the job application packet, your email and phone on the job application packet, and on the cover letter, you also want to include it on your CV, because if they're going to call you, you want them to find your phone number as quickly as possible. But, okay, so 4 major categories, and a little later we're going to talk about how you arrange these, because it does matter depending on what you plan to do. But I'm going to go through a table of contents, and I'm going to work through this relatively quickly because, 1, again, time later, and 2, the important thing is I'm giving you a bunch of options of what might be there, and you all might not have all of this yet. And that's, again, why I want you to have access to this later at a point in time. So, at the head of a CV, and so here's mine. Let's do that. At the head of the CV, like I said, you have that contact information. And what you include here, again, look at different people. Some people include their professional and their personal, so they'll have both addresses. Some do put phone numbers, some don't put phone numbers. Notice, even though I have a professional phone number, I put a Google Voice number as opposed to my ODU number. Variety of reasons, what, why, how of information you can put up here. Again, specifically if you're making your CV for the job market, you want almost every way of getting a hold of you imaginable. Because if they want to call you, you want them to find the information. Then is that education section. Now exactly how this is arranged differs. This is one of those areas in terms of formatting, I think I've seen the most difference in what people include and how they arrange it. But kind of typical things is what degree you have, what's the degree in, where you got the degree from, when the degree was awarded. You can put pending in parentheses before something, so all of you are pending for a degree. Definitely put that. I've seen different programs, whether you put the title of your work or not, whether you put your committee. I've seen different versions do that. I very specifically leave this up here. Do not put something on here unless you're willing to talk about it. So again, notice my master's thesis is called Alien as Pornographic Text. If I'm not willing to talk about that, I don't want it on my CV. And that's something to think about, whether there's work you've done or professional experiences in the past. So for example, when I applied for my first job, I worked full-time at a community college for 9 years. I started off my undergraduate years at West Point, and that launched into a whole conversation in my application process, what that meant, what that experience meant. So if you're not willing to talk about it, make sure it's not there. And one thing that, I will just say this, one thing that my CV does not do a good example of, I want to say there's at least one in there that's better, we might see it. How many of you have had full careers before you came back to grad school? That's something else. You potentially want to go see how other people have handled that in their CVs. And depending how closely that career is connected to your future career as an academic, and what you put in CV is what you decide to put there, and how you decide to describe it. And there's a marketing one in here. We can look at that a little later. So, and then again, this is done slightly differently on different CVs. Academic appointments, this resembles on that resume, that quick listing of these are the jobs I've had. But again, look at samples. This whole front area that I just went through, the information there is generally in everyone's CVs, but how it's presented, I've seen a huge variety of ways that's done. Now, the three big categories: research, teaching, service. There's a few others, but these are the biggies. Research, there's tons of ways you're going to potentially break this up. Usually, you're starting with your publications because they're weighted the most in terms of tenure-track positions. And even within those publications, you're starting with the types of publications that are weighted most, so books, book chapters, referee journal articles, versus other types of publications that you might do. Some people even do have a works in progress area. Be careful of that for two reasons. One, if you're really not that far along in that work, you probably don't want to put it there because who knows what's going to happen. And two, if you're like I am, I sometimes forget to update that thing. Like the example in mine, I realized after I publish it, and then I'm like, oh, I'm not going back for this. I'd forgotten to look at that area, so just warning. Creative work. So do I have any artists in the room? Yay, we have the...
That's not related to what
That's not related to what you do, okay. I was going to say, what's the term I want for that? Academic artist? That's not quite it, but basically for the folks, dance, creative writing, art, graphic design, all that, their creative work is the equivalent of research for those of us in more researchy fields. And so that tends to go there. But you'll also find that a lot of them also do research. And even though I put creative work second, that's my research scholar bias. If you look at an artist's CV, that creative work is the very first thing, because that makes sense. It's the most important thing for what they do. After your creative work or written publications, then it's into that presentation mode. And again, you have lots of ways that you might break that up. At some point, people will start inviting you to presentations. Somehow you do want to mark that, whether you mark it as an asterisk or you have a category. There's ways of doing that. Conference presentations, some of you, and depending on your discipline, may want to distinguish between refereed conference presentations, meaning there's a very robust peer review process. Based on my scholarship and my experience and being a faculty member at 9 years at community college, I'm very adamant about participating in regional conferences. To be blunt, they review their proposals, but really it's not a robust peer review process. Does that make sense? Whereas usually our big national conferences, they can tell you the numbers, the percentages of who made it and who didn't. And depending on your field, depending on what you need to do, you may distinguish between that. I personally don't, but others do. Workshops, usually you do want to distinguish between something that's more of a scholarly research presentation versus a workshop. A lot of disciplines have those, versus a poster presentation. And you may have different things in your field that I'm not talking about. You know it better than I do. And then grants. And interesting, grants is an interesting thing. I tend to connect it with research. Other people put it as it's something a little bit not buried under research. Again, this becomes go look at the CVs you like. But the big things, granting agency, category, dates. Really important stuff for grant is somehow you want to talk about what your role is. People always want to know how much the grant was worth. And this was something in ODU, as I was looking at ODU examples, here at least for the ODU ones, they want to know both what grants you've applied for and what grants you were awarded. And so again, if you think in terms of keeping a master CV, a master list of everything you do, it makes sense that you would also track the ones you applied for, because applying for a big grant takes a lot of energy. And you didn't receive versus also the ones that you received. Now, whether when you present that CV for something, whether that applied list makes it to the presentation, maybe not. Any questions on research category? Was there something that I said that all of you were like, okay, I've always seen this, and Shelley, you didn't mention that? Here's the interesting thing. Usually for you all, so how many of you are PhD students? Okay, and the rest masters. Do I have any MFAs? For you all, usually this section of the CV is not the most difficult because it's what your scholarly career to this point has focused on. It's the next two sections that you haven't done as much work in, or you haven't worried yet about how you're going to present yourself. Teaching. So I will stand up here and remind you, even if you get that premier tenure track, low teaching, low requirement job, dream job, you will have to teach. It is, I mean, unless you are the rock star scholar who gets grants that buys your way out of all your classes, and most people don't do that, folks. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm just saying most don't. Unless that's you, you will teach, and you need to track what you've done. Again, how people do this, and I have some perfect examples I'll show a little later. How people do this, radically different ways. But I want to briefly talk about some things, especially in this day and age, that you will probably want to distinguish on your CV. You want to make sure institution, department, course number, course title. Those are basic things. But department even matters. So for example, at the community college, I taught CIS classes because they were teaching on how to teach online classes, and they were in the CIS department. And so that's this odd thing on my CV, but I want it there to demonstrate I've done that. But especially now, you probably want to start distinguishing what are the formats of the classes you've taught. Synchronous versus asynchronous distance learning, web-based distance learning, especially here at ODU. Most of the time out in the real world now, if you say distance learning, people assume you mean web-based distance learning. ODU has a long, rich history of asynchronous distance learning that is not web-based. And if you actually have the opportunity to either teach one of those classes or TA for one of those classes, make sure you mention that, because that's a pedagogical skill that most people actually don't have to think about. What does it mean to do that? So what I'm getting at here, hybrid, computer-mediated classroom, honors, program-specific, study abroad, etc. Acknowledge that you can teach classes in different formats and different settings, and those matter. Sometimes those will be things that get you an interview even though it wasn't even mentioned on the job ad. The job ad, they might not mention that they're in the middle of growing an online program. But if you can say, hey, I've taught an online class, or hey, I've taught at least in a computer classroom, I've thought about what it means to have students learning through a computer, that will make you stand apart. But also, just what will make you stand apart is that if you understand to distinguish that. That these are different formats, and those formats require different ways of thinking, designing, structuring, delivering, and even assessing what goes on in the classroom. Other things that you want to distinguish. In English, a TA is really not a TA. Because in English, we teach first-year composition, the only universally required class. There's tons upon tons upon tons of writing classes. Almost all English TAs get experience of what's traditionally called instructor of record. Meaning that's their class. They're the ones who assign the grade. And if someone complains, it's going back to that person. Does that make sense? In a lot of fields, as grad students, as much as you want the teaching experience, the only teaching experience you'll get is as a traditional TA, teaching assistant. Folks, you need to be able to distinguish that. Especially if you're in a field, so this is the case a lot of times in the sciences, that you will never get the opportunity to be instructor of record. Because if you do ever, that will make you stand apart from other fresh out of grad school science students. If you can say, I taught this one class as instructor of record, that means you had a level of responsibility that most of them have not had yet. Other things, breakout section facilitator, so you might do guest lectures. Again, especially as grad students, those are things that are worth adding to your CV, especially now. And especially if you're struggling to have teaching experience. So how many in here know they're going to be a teacher when they grow up? Okay. Okay, remember I said most of you will. And of those who are adamant, how many of you are struggling to get some actual teaching experience that you would like? Okay. So that becomes really important that you acknowledge it's okay early in your CV that you might have things like guest lecture, and that may fall off later once you have more teaching experience.
But I am a TA, but
yeah.
just like you said,
you don't get instructed, right.
A lot of background.
And go talk to your mentors. Sometimes they're really like, I just found this summer a student in the program who basically wants to do film studies, and I was teaching a 300 level film class. I'm like, yeah, you can come guest lecture. You know, I mean, of course you can. Yeah, so talk to people.
So if you have given a guest lecture, what would you put that under?
I probably would have just a guest lecture category.
Okay.
For a while.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that, again, because also a lot of times guest lectures may be the only way that you get the opportunity to teach your specialization before you leave grad school. Because most of the time as TAs, even if you're instructor of record, you get the gen ed classes. So having that is not a bad thing because it shows that you ran a classroom, that you've thought about teaching your content area, all of that.
I have a question for
Yeah.
you. If you are still building, obviously, teaching experience and you don't have a lot of it, is it okay to do out-of-field teaching experience that is not like a classroom teaching, but guest lecturing when it's not your field?
Absolutely. And I'm actually going to talk about some of the ways where that might show up in your CV, and that might also be something that doesn't show up in your CV and shows up in your cover letter. But I think there are spaces for that to show up in the CV, and let's talk through a couple. Hold on to that, and let's see by the end if you're like, yeah, I can see where it can fit in. So notice service is here. I've got a few other categories named before service. Administrative experience. That you might do something that actually you're paid for. So, GSO president, are you getting graduate, TA, RA time for this, or is it purely voluntary?
Oh, this?
Yeah.
It's voluntary.
It's voluntary. Okay, so because it's voluntary, that's under service. Now, if in this year she does a really good job and demonstrates the usefulness of this program, and the institution decides we will give her 10 hours to run the GSO, all of a sudden that becomes administrative experience. Does that flip make sense? And folks, here's the big thing. Although right now you're primarily being trained as researchers, maybe a little teaching, wherever you go, you will have to get the work done, and that all falls under administrative experience and service. That's a lot of what we do. So if you have anything that's administrative service, administrative experience, and let me see what I have. I'm forgetting right now what's in.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your administrative experience, is that different than work experience?
It might be. Remember I said you might have prior teaching or prior work experience. It may fit there. Teaching. I'm looking here. There we go. So these two here, faculty professional development coordinator and instructional technologist, those were reassigned time. So I was a full-time faculty member, and they said instead of teaching X number of classes, you will do these experiences. There's that second-year coordinator preparing future faculty. So that was instead of teaching as a TA, I did this other administrative experience. Consulting activities may be something, and you all might just have a category that's prior work experience. But the main thing to keep in mind is it needs to be relevant to whatever identity you're constructing for yourself now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
However, if part of it is you need to construct yourself as a teacher, and there's, say, community service where you facilitated workshops, that might work its way in there to demonstrate that skill. Sometimes we bring in things to our CVs and resumes that demonstrate certain soft skills, and you can do that. You just have to think about, what am I trying to construct myself as, and put it in the appropriate category. And that's the interesting thing. Some of these, depending on what you're doing, can be in different categories, or may even show up twice. I have a couple examples of that as well. Great questions. Consulting activities, that's basically jobs, once you are kind of an academic, where they're paying you for your academic expertise outside of your day-to-day thing. Now, but what's interesting is I have that in multiple places. Remember I said presentations, I've invited presentations. Some of those could be called consulting. Does that make sense? Usually consulting is something paid. Again, paid versus service. So what you're finding out at this point is it's fuzzy, and that's why you go look at how other people have handled things. And especially those of you who had prior careers, you will end up having to craft some of it just based on what makes sense to you. And that's why it's important that you talk to your mentor and you go to the Career Management Center and you talk to other people and go, this is what I'm trying to do, does this make sense to you? Okay, so service, that's that last big category. Service usually, I'm going to click down here just a little bit. What I've seen is people tend to break it up into national and international. district, state, region, university and college, department, and community. A lot of people break their national into service on professional organizations, which is usually committees, as different from editorial boards and service to scholarly journals. So if you are a peer reviewer or on an editorial board, keep that something different or make that list. And it depends. It's one of those things that at first you may not break that break. I just made that break recently. Because I had enough there, if that makes sense. National, international is usually your professional organization, so it's usually disciplinary specific. District, state, region. So my ed people. How many of my ed people? A lot of you end up having a lot of service here because you work with your states. University and college, sometimes that's discipline specific, but that's where the work of the institution gets done. Department and community. I do want to say, if you have community, unless your institution asks for it, this should be community service that, again, is connected to your professional identity. So again, if you're making that I taught in this space, and you're trying to do that, or that, say, I have a bunch of colleagues who are ESL, English as Second Language instructors, and they do a lot of community service, and that's a professional service for them. Does that make sense? Not just saying I went and helped pick up trash on the fit. No.
Unless you're in environmental science.
Unless you're environmental science. But that's exactly the point. If you can connect it to what you do, then it should be there. Now, folks, I'm just going to take a step aside here. 9 years full-time at a community college. I was on a lot of hiring committees. With over 200 applications. And that service category is important because what it says is I am willing to do the work that needs to be done to keep our discipline vibrant and our institution running. If you have no service, I looked at that and said, really, do you think you're just going to teach and go home, or teach and research and go home? That's it? Most of you can start doing, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be doing your research and you shouldn't be doing your teaching, but most of you can do a little bit of service before you leave your grad program. Serving on the executive committee of a student organization definitely counts as service. A lot of departments, some of their committees have a space for a graduate student. Even if you're a non-voting member, that's service. Does that, demonstrating that willingness? But I'm the first to admit, come on in. It's a tricky line, and no one has enough time. The last three categories, this is more of a note. Professional memberships, you do just a list of what you pay to be a member of. Again, it's saying you're committed to keeping up your professional knowledge. Honors and awards. Start now. If you get a graduate peer mentoring award, so my partner in scholarly crime and I both got mentoring awards from our peers, both in the department and in the institution at large. We both can explicitly talk about how those awards helped us get jobs, especially jobs where all of a sudden we were working with other graduate students. Does that make sense? So keep those awards there. Some may fall off. So if you get the school newspaper students ranked you as the coolest teacher, that may be there at first and it may fall off later. But the fact that enough did say something at first is worth, you made an impact, and that's what they're looking at. Also, honors and awards, again, based on what I saw people doing, if you're elected to a national, so I'll flip down mine here. Okay, honors and awards. Elected to nominating committee, elected to executive committee. This shows up twice on my CV. One, it shows up as 3 years of service to my discipline. I served on the executive committee. Last meeting is next month. I'm so excited. But the fact I was elected to it, that's an honor, folks. That means colleagues in my discipline voted. The last thing, references. That may or may not. Usually that is something that's asked for, and honestly, I keep it on a separate document. And if it's asked for, I just cut and paste it in and then turn it into a PDF. Does that make sense? But those references, some do ask for it as the final thing. And just make sure name, title, institution, contact information, and sometimes you may want what's your connection or association. So, dissertation chair. I did a lot of work in our Center for Teaching and Learning, so I could be advisor, the director of that was my boss in a different way. Does that make sense? Showing those connections. Okay, the rest of this stuff is more about individual differences, formatting. That's a lot of content, isn't it? It is. Folks, you'd be surprised at how quickly it adds up. Most of you probably have at least a 2-page single-space, if not somewhere between 2 and 4 CV. By the time you're a PhD student towards the end of your career, you probably do. If you've been going to conferences and presenting, even local ones, you put those there first. I mean, if you've been primarily doing graduate conferences, those hit your CV right now. They may fall off later, but those are on your CV now. So I'm going to briefly, really quickly whiz through this stuff. I've mentioned a couple times the difference between having a master CV and a presentation CV. Folks, I can't stress how important that is because like I said, you'll be asked for your CV for sometimes for publications, sometimes for awards, and a lot of times they'll give you a page limit. And in that minute, it becomes a presentation CV. But, so what you need to get the hang of, is that it? That's it. Is thinking about archiving your CV. So what you have here, let's see, what's the furthest date? There's 06. I don't think I'm seeing any 05s. So you're seeing all of my versions of my CVs over the years. And I've kept them. And it's important for a couple things. You want those, you want to potentially put what you submitted them for. Sometimes if you push something off and you realize later, then you might find it again. And here we have 5-page FRI, NCTE noms. Those were specific CVs for things. But yes, have a naming structure that makes sense. Usually dates work. Okay, so here's where we get to start looking in terms of some of my colleagues. Formatting. Julia's is one of the more beautiful CVs I've seen. It makes sense, folks. She's a professional writing scholar. Does that make sense? She needs to demonstrate what she does. So just acknowledging that. One colleague said, and I kind of like this, don't use the default of MS Word. At least go pick one font. However, I will say this. So I was sitting in a CV workshop, and he said that, and I was like, that was a really good idea. And I know I didn't do that. So I went and picked, I forget exactly what it was, but the problem is, and maybe it won't show here, in one version, when I made it a PDF, the letters were a little askew, and I'm like, really? That? So all that to say is, pay some attention to your formatting. Related to formatting, MLA versus APA versus Chicago. Go with the default of your field. However, I struggle with that. So as a Rec Comp scholar in English, I tend to align a little bit more as a social science person. A lot of the journals I publish in use APA. However, when applying for jobs, most of the people on that hiring committee, English MLA. So before I applied for a job, I took my CV that as a grad student, I'm like, I'm going to be APA, and I did it. I reworked the entire CV and turned it back to MLA style. Actually, that was a really interesting exercise. It made me pay very close attention to what was in my CV. But just realize once you make that decision, if you're like I am in a field that might straddle two styles, The work of revising it takes some time. Marking other things, marking collaborative work. You'll notice in mine, so we have to scroll way back to the top. I have the percentage, most of my work is collaborative, so percentage represented by a portion of work and co-authored. I have little percentage markers. And that may be important, but again, check your field. Sciences, it's almost always collaborative, and whether they do that or not. Organization. If you're applying to a teaching-focused institution, all that teaching stuff goes before research. Again, hiring committee, community college for 9 years. If I saw that CV that emphasized research first, my first question was, do they really know where they're applying? Do they really know what the vast majority of their work is going to be here? Maybe not. Finally, length. Can it get too long? Absolutely. Mine is probably bordering on that. But it depends on the professional identity you're trying to construct. Things will fall off. If you went to graduate conferences, those will probably fall off at some point. If you had teaching experiences in there that were trying to demonstrate something, but they're not even related to the field, they don't fit except to do that, once you have some teaching experience, those will fall off. And then in your presentation ones, you'll have to make decisions. Like, for a lot of my colleagues, they would argue that all the regional work I've done in terms of conferences should fall off. But like I said, that's part of my professional identity, and I'm trying to say something with that so it stays on. But it's difficult because my CV is too long. So just acknowledging there is no right or wrong answer. There's just better and worse versions of your CV in a situation you're submitting it to. Just remember, when you're submitting for a job application, those people are sitting down with lots and lots and lots and lots of paper. Some things I want to quickly show you. Oh, I forgot, I did like this. Another one who collaborates a lot. She puts her name in bold where it's listed in the authoring. I thought that was an interesting formatting thing. This person is in marketing, and what I really liked was her professional profile. Her CV is only 5 pages, that's pretty short for a faculty, and she has this professional profile, but she's from Marketing, College of Business. It doesn't surprise me that her CV is starting to look more resume-ish, if that makes sense. What else do we got here? That idea of, is it too long? Cynthia, when we get to her publications. So look at this, that was all administrative work. Grants, publications, selected publications. You'll start to see that a lot, especially with full professors, because by the time they've hit full professor, they have selected publications and selected presentations, because if they didn't, those CVs would probably be 30 plus pages, even with 11-point font. And on that note, I didn't mention it. Don't go smaller than 12-point, period. I mean, 12-point, 1-inch margins. You don't break it. If you've been staring for 6 hours at paper, looking at 10-point font, I'll put it aside. I might come back to it later, but you get my point, right? You've got to think of your audience at this point, folks. Here's an example of performing arts. So she's got teaching, and then boom, performing experience. It's not even research. And then what I really liked about this, if we scroll down, this was one of those things that it looks so radically different from mine. Performing experiences versus choreography. This is one of those things where it's important that you look at the ones in your field. I can only, even the folks from your colleges, if you're in a pretty different discipline, can only give you so much guidance. interesting things in terms of service. Oh, okay, yeah. So I want to distinguish two things here. Professional service. Okay, here we go. So her category of professional service, Old Dominion professional service, committee work, and then presentations. So what I'm doing right now on this CV would fall into that category. What I want to do is compare that to how it looks on mine. Scroll down. Remember I had administrative service as faculty professional development coordinator and a year's instructional technologist. So under my teaching area, I have this category, professional development activities. Let's see, come on. Oh, I don't want to. There we go. Professional development activities. So I have this explanation of, once I started doing that work, I've done this so much, it makes no sense for me to list them all. This is part of how I kept it shorter. So what we have here instead is a listing of the types of topics, and like in teaching, the different types of formats I've done professional development. Does that make sense? And that was that example of where I went and looked at a bunch of different people and how they handled, people I knew who did this work a lot, how they handled it, and then I made up the way that made sense to me, and I had to briefly explain what I was doing and why I was doing it. And that's what for some of you, especially prior careers, you may have to do things like this. And especially this switch from at a community college for 9 years, doing a lot of professional development work, to now I'm in a tenure track research focus line. I had to show what that is and how it connected. Yeah, sorry.
I think you just answered it.
Oh.
Because it's not your own professional development, it's workshops and...
Right, yeah, this isn't the professional development of what I attended, this is what I've facilitated. So for me, today goes under here, whereas for Mona's, hers goes under institutional service. And I like that. Part of what you're seeing is depending on how they're constructing their identity, where things fit. And you may decide at some point to switch it. I saw that and I'm like, hey, that's good, I like that. Because it distinguishes different types of things. I could instead take this and break it into institutional service and consulting. I could probably break all of that to those two categories. But what I like about this is it's showing there is no one right way. Just going to show a few more. Grants. As someone in the mushy humanities, I can call myself that because, come on. Grants. As someone in the mushy humanities, we're just starting to get heavy pressure for going for grants, and so you're starting to see that more on our CVs. Those of you in the social sciences and the sciences, grants are a critical component of your CV. I've seen grants presented in a variety of ways. And like I said, there tends to be core information, who, what your role, the agency, the title, and the amount. Those tend to be the very core. Some have brief descriptions of what you did. Some have length of time, because some of these are like 5-year grants, stuff like that. Again, look at your professors and people in the field.
I noticed that yours, your description was in first person. Is that typical, the description, or is that a personal preference?
And it's a great question. That, again, that's very much a field thing. In the humanities and in the softer social sciences, I think we can get away with first person more. And to me, there's a ethos, ethics, both ethos and ethics connected to that. Whereas in the sciences, I mean, y'all write passive voice. You completely erase yourself. So no, you're not going to do that on your CV. I mean, if you're doing that in your scholarship, you're not going to switch into your CV. Okay. And again, that's the great question, and it's the perfect example of you must go look at others. What was this one? Oh, this I really liked. Some people, and this becomes one of those teaching things again. Some of us taught in English, so I had an instructor of record tons of years. and then I was at a community college where I was teaching a 5-5 load. Folks, I don't list every single course section what semester that I've taught. That would be, my list would go on forever. In this case, not only listing when, but also even some of the evaluation numbers. I'm pretty sure this is an ODU example, and so it may be one of those requirements, but just showing stuff is done differently in different places for different reasons. It is okay to put your professional development, what you've gone and done, for a couple reasons. One, as graduate students, you need to demonstrate your continuing commitment to professional growth. Now, I would argue you wouldn't put today down in your CV. I went to a CV workshop. But if this were a workshop about teaching and learning or a research method, I would put it down. Does that distinction make sense? Similarly, in this one, she has licensure. So we do have someone in the health sciences, a couple folks in the health sciences. You all have continuing, not only continuing ed requirements, but you sometimes have very specific licensing requirements. That's relevant. You make a category for it. You put it there.
Would we throw in those graduate level certificates? Because we've got a GIS certificate, we've got modeling and simulation, or would we throw that into, or would that be?
Oh, where would that be?
Or would
Well, the distinction of where that, would that be under education or licensing?
Yeah,
It probably, or certificate, again, that depends on what you're demonstrating, what you're constructing. If you have enough of them, I'm guessing maybe in their own category.
But this PFF, the preparing
Right.
future faculty, if we're going for a teaching position, we'd want to throw it in the education, right, to catch.
Actually,
lots of
no. I was going to say, I think you would put that either in a professional development category that you might have for a while, or you would put it under honors and awards. Like I have under my honors and awards my preparing future faculty certification. Yeah, there's a variety of places you can do that. But when you have something like that where, because what it is slippery, that might be something that's really important to put in your cover letter. Does that make sense? So if a bunch of you are doing the preparing future faculty gig, that's something that's worth putting in your cover letter because one, what PFF used to be when it started and what it is now in different institutions is different, so you probably want to describe briefly what it is you did. But two, because there is no standardized home for where it fits on the CV, you don't want it to get lost. But again, it's like the service, commitment to service. It's saying, I'm committed. I wanted to understand what different types of institutions are and what my responsibilities as a person full-time in higher ed. Administrative. Okay, so is anyone in here thinking of being an alt-ac, alternative academic?
What is
Huh?
What is that?
What is that? That's someone who's working in higher ed, not as a professor, not as a tenure track faculty or as a teaching faculty, usually administrative side of the house. So, I mean, there's enough folks doing that now with PhDs. The catchphrase is alt-ac, and they have CVs as well because they're still in higher ed. And that's where administrative work comes up at the top instead of research or teaching. And my final example, this faculty member is an instructor. No, she's a lecturer. And because she, one, because lecturer, teaching specific, and two, renewable position, her CV is only 2 pages and begins to resemble more of a resume again. But format structurally looks more like a CV. So, all that to say is, it's confusing, have fun. Have fun. Examples, examples, examples. That's it. You want to steal them. Find the ones you like, copy them. At this point, my other faculty, if we can hit the lights, other